Described as work performed at household level by somebody in a home other than their own home, domestic work is one of the most common and traditional forms of work in Africa, employing all categories of people by age, sex, and race. Most of these are children or young people whose actual number remains non-established. In Uganda, many of those involved in domestic work are girl children, mainly between the ages of 10 and 17 years, representing 26% of the country's total population. Between 1997 and 2013, government introduced free universal primary and secondary education for all school-going age. Despite the availability of free educational programs, the country has high school dropout rates. This has left many underage for domestic work. While on duty, however, these normally encounter a number of problems, including working for long hours with little or no pay, sexual harassment, and other inhuman forms of treatment, such as denial of food, among others. This is a story of despair and insecurity of Uganda's child domestic worker. Nakuya Brenda, 10 years, is a Congolese national. In 2013, she and her relatives fled their country following the outbreak of war in which both her parents were killed. Orphaned at this tender age and having settled here as a refuge, Nakuya was forced into domestic work by her relatives as a means of survival and making their ends meet. However, since then, working for a family has been a story of misery. Waking up early morning, she has to contend with cleaning a dusty compound as her master looks on. Nakuya then monitors the breakfast meal she's preparing. But this she does with her fragile hands that have over time become numb to heat and burns. Visibly in pain, Brenda also does the dishes, a duty routine that most times comes with little or no pay at the end of the month. Just like her peers in elementary and primary school, little Nakuya also remains hopeful she will one day return to class she last attended in primary 2. Nasimbi Harriet is another domestic worker. At just 14 years, Nasimbi also always wakes up to the same duty routine. In a home of 5 able-bodied family members, she has to ensure an orderly sitting room environment and that the dishes used at supper time are clean. Having been promised a 60,000 shilling monthly wage for services as a domestic worker in March 2015, Harriet Nasimbi travelled with her mother from Chiboga district and took on the job. She also viewed the opportunity as a means to raise school fees and return to school she had dropped out at primary 6. However, 5 months down the road, her story in this trade is one of mistreatment and denial of basic rights. Even efforts to have her employer comment on Nasimbi's accusations are futile as they constantly avoid our cameras. Bekiriza Deo, 22 years old, began duty as a young domestic worker in 2013. Just like his female counterparts, Deo wakes up to a similar housekeeping duty, ensuring that the day's breakfast meal is ready. Supper utensils are cleaned, just in time for usage. Even with an 80,000 shillings monthly wage for his services, Bekiriza, whose education journey stopped at Senior 4, remains passionate about vocational skills training, hoping to take on formal employment as a driver.
Era na muzee naye yenyini yali akintaddamu nti aba ayagala oba muntu asobola mu Buganda amutwala mu kyalo namuza kwa bano olusi babeera busy tebasobola mutwala ate ne no public service, public transport ya taxi, bus ebirala takyabisobola kati bansobola okikola guno ne nguvaamu nentwala guli neabo bansasulira ku ogwo.
Namatovu Hamida, tender-aged, is a domestic worker. In 2002, Namatovu and her aunt left Kabale and journeyed to Kampala for holiday. She, however, failed to return home to continue with her education due to their failure to raise school fees. With no option, Namatovu's aunt decided to find her a job as a domestic worker at their neighbor's home. Ever since then, this journey for little Hamida, now 13 years, has been one of harassment. Visibly stigmatized, she has to endure being backed at occasionally and sometimes beaten for the small mistakes made while on duty. But when asked about what the future holds for her child domestic worker, employer Judea Najinda says she is marriage material.
Kale wemba mfunye omuntu oba mutwalo muwasa bino ebyanga biveemu ebyokuma abaana.
Against this situation, IDAY International, a global civil society organization comprising of 18 countries in Africa and 4 in Europe, proposed action. In 2010, while in summit in Burundi capital, Bujumbura, it launched a campaign for protection, legal recognition and training of domestic workers in Eastern Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. From its inception, this crusade received and it continues to enjoy support from the European Union.
Looking at the region, there's nothing that has been done in terms of finding out what are domestic workers, what are the issues underlying in there that are really driving, everybody talks about poverty, but what exactly in poverty? So it would be very good and interesting actually to read a little bit about the findings. What are the findings going to be like? Because everybody looks at issues of poverty to be the main drive that is actually pushing for domestic work issues, and also having a little bit of what I would call violence, especially to the children and the young people. That it's one of the things that actually drove the EU to say that, okay, within the region, these issues are there, but how exactly do we tackle it? It could be very good to come up with an intervention, but then you don't come up with that intervention without having a basis. So having this survey, maybe it's going to form a basis of to say, okay, this is where the issues are and how best can these issues be tackled.
To this effect, on the 26th November 2013, IDAY International partnered with other organizations including the African Network for the Prevention and Protection of Children Against Abuse and Neglect, APCAN, Uganda National Council for Children, and the Uganda Children's Center, and conducted a joint survey on legal and policy framework on child domestic workers in Uganda.
If you go to places like Kampiringisa National Rehabilitation Center, you find that there are so many young girls, which young girls have been taken there because of various petty offenses committed in homes, and you find that most of these young girls and boys were involved in some domestic work somewhere in people's homes. And then we're asking ourselves, why is the problem escalating? There must be something which is not checked properly. So we need to check something to see to it that we reduce this magnitude.
Through its line Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Welfare, government says it has equally supported the battle against child domestic work, enacting a number of laws, including the Children's Act.
As I speak now, this act is undergoing the amendment, various amendments. Government has also enacted the Employment Act number 6 of 2006. Under Section 2 of the Employment Act, there is a provision under this section. Child labor is criminalized and it is outlawed. Whoever employs young domestic workers as child laborers can be tried in the courts of law.
However, The joint assessment IDAY-Uganda conducted with her children rights advocacy partners identified a number of loopholes, which included the Employment Act of 2006, which offers less protection to domestic workers since it does not formalize their work to allow a labor officer to inspect it.
These children are behind the curtains. We do not know the circumstances they are going through. So how best can we help them? How best can we put the law implement the law if we cannot reach them, if we cannot talk to them? Probably the LCs could visit their homes.
The National Social Security Act of 1985 only provides for workers in the formal private sector, leaving domestic workers without any social cover.
Let domestic worker be recognized as work. Let it be formal. Let employers be brought on board and know that this is work, and therefore there must be, let it be streamlined.
The Business, Technical and Vocational Education Training Strategic Plan does not highlight domestic workers as one of the priorities. Much as the Child Labour Policy of 2006 recognizes child labour, it does not offer solutions to ending it.
Government also, for example, could harmonize the laws. If you look at the Employment Act, it mentions 12 years, and then the Constitution also a different age. We are giving perpetrators the opportunity to play around with the law. They will say, oh, this child is this age, this child is the other age. Besides, if you look at the Constitution, they say if a child has every person is supposed to work for 8 hours. But usually we think this only applies for the professionals.
Since 2004, Uganda has experienced a steady rise in the number of young people involved in domestic work.
So we really have to have what I call a concerted effort. It could be the government, it's the CSOs, it's the community, it's the development partners, to try to make sure that they work together, to make sure that actually children live as children, not children living as adults, where we are having a child who is supposed to be like 10 years working in a family. I'm just giving an example, and nobody cares why is that child working and not going to school. So bottom line, at least to me, education is very key for every child who is born.
According to the International Labour Organization, the number moved from 200,000 children that year to 17.2 million children by 2012 and has continued to grow to the present day.